Well, hello. Welcome to the first class around information technology importance and strategic planning. My name is Brian LeClaire, and I'd like to welcome each of you as you participate in today's lecture. I thought I'd start out by first going through a couple of introductions. One, a little bit about myself. I talk about my educational background, my professional background and interests, so you get to know me. Hopefully through the next 8 weeks, I get to know each of you better. Course information, a little bit about what we're expecting to learn, the structure of the class, and then expectations of you so that you know what the various assignments are going to be like over the next 8 or so weeks. This is a little bit of a new experience for me. I've been involved in asynchronous experiences, webcasts, for instance, but never trying to teach a class of PhD students around a topic like information technology strategy and doing that without a face-to-face. So hopefully we're both going to learn through this and we have an engaging exchange of information and ideas through the next 8 weeks as if we were in the same class at the same time. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I went to undergraduate school in Wisconsin. My major was in psychology. I had a formal training in teaching in learning disabilities. In particular, I graduated certified to teach kindergarten through 8th grade learning disabilities in the state of Wisconsin, which I believe makes me uniquely qualified at times to deal with senior leaders in a business circumstance. From there, I pursued an MBA with an accounting emphasis, and then tied an interest in technology with a PhD from Oklahoma State University in management information systems, and a doctoral minor in computer science with a quantitative analysis emphasis, which just means a lot of operations research and management science coursework. I did spend a few years in academia. I taught the master's and PhD level at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in their School of Business Administration. I did some independent consulting on the side for companies like Northwestern Mutual as well as Johnson Controls. And I got a feel for what it meant to be in business. I enjoyed the academic lifestyle, especially the instruction and the interaction with students. I also did the research, but the difference for me between being in academia and being in industry was you might go out for a steak dinner every 6 or so months in academia, but in business it's like popping M&Ms every 5 or 10 minutes throughout the day. So I got that real desire to make a difference and decided to take a shot at the private sector and was recruited by several organizations. Ultimately, I with a company called Prudential in their individual systems and administration organization. I came into that company recruited by someone who, by the time I completed my obligations for finishing the semester at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, found that the individual who had recruited me and hired me had been moved on to a different project. So coming new into a very large organization, at the time the business unit I joined was about 30,000 people in size. It was a very, very big learning experience. First transitioning out of academia into the private sector, but secondly going to work for a company where I knew virtually no one there, including a new boss. I spent quite a bit of time there, a few years. It was a tremendous learning experience. I was involved in a variety of initiatives, including a technology plan for a direct-to-consumer product offering. I helped lead that effort. And as I said, it was probably my first real experience in the private sector. It was one working for a large organization, and it was one involved in technology planning, which, after all, is the topic of this course. From there, I took a position working for a company called Altel in their information services business unit in their telecommunications division, where I was responsible initially for the architecture oversight of a large scale customer care and billing system that was being used in the wireless business space, ultimately responsible for architecture across the wireless and wireline business, and then eventually became responsible for their software product development across all aspects of the telecommunication division. I did get an opportunity to join a company called Humana, and I did so back in mid 1999, and I've been here with Humana ever since. I'm their Chief Information Officer. I'm responsible for all technology at Humana, including planning for and implementing across a variety of systems and areas. I did spend a few years responsible for various parts of their service operations organization, back office, which ran the gamut from enrollment to calls, claims, fraud, waste, and abuse, and provider relationship management, and had the opportunity to combine technology and operations across a roughly 13 to 15,000 person organization. And along the way, was introduced to some folks here at the University of the Cumberlands who talked about coming in and sharing some of those experiences back in an academic environment, and that's how I came here. Now, that's my background in terms of education and profession. On a personal basis, I've been married for the last 30 years. In fact, in about a week and a half will be my 30th anniversary. I have 4 children. One of them is in San Francisco working for a startup, and very happy to do that. One is in Boston working for an insurance company in an actuarial capacity. One works here in Louisville. And the last is just about to graduate, knock on wood. He's a senior in college, and he's now facing that space of how to get out into the academic world. These pictures in front of you are of the family and various gatherings. And I've got a couple of things in here. One of my favorite foods is Eggo waffles with peanut butter and jelly, and then ramen noodles as well. And you look in the lower right, you'll see a picture inside an airplane. One of my favorite pastimes is flying. I'm a licensed pilot. I'm instrument rated. I'm endorsed on complex aircraft as well as high performance aircraft. And in the lower left is Zoe. She's basically my study buddy at home, and when I'm on the computer, she comes and will sit by me. And unfortunately, because we're taping, I've got her put away in case she starts barking. So that gives you a sense for who I am. I did put a discussion topic or forum out there so that you get an opportunity to share who you are, what you do, and what you're interested in. In particular, I'd like to understand what you all would like to achieve through this course, and then get to know each of you a little bit by asking for some interesting fact about you. So if you haven't done so already, I checked yesterday and there were 3 students who had participated in the discussion thread. I invite the rest of you who haven't yet to do so, to get to know one another and give me a chance to get to know each of you further. So I did want to talk a little bit about the structure of the course. I've got the syllabus. The syllabus is online in the content section. Essentially, what I'd like to get out of this is to help you understand probably 3 things. One, what is an information technology strategy? Now, each of you should have obtained a copy of the text, and it talks about managing and using information systems. It doesn't necessarily go directly into technology, and that's going to lead me into the second of the three objectives. So ideally, as we go through these topics, I will weave together my experiences of defining technology strategies for organizations, small to large, and how to think about technology. It's fairly straightforward, but you'll get a sense as we go through today's introduction into various elements and relationships around IT strategy. Secondly, the world is changing, and it's changing in a variety of ways, but when it comes to technology, managers today, general business managers, carry a much different set of expectations around technology than perhaps in the past. Uh, Essentially, in some cases, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, um, technology is as much the business as the business itself. And any longer, folks who are general managers have to have a deep understanding of that, not of the technical elements of, let's say, is Java better than C Sharp, or what does it mean to look at containers, and is Docker better than Kubernetes? I mean, that's not what technology means. What technology means is what are the potential um, uh, threats? What are the potential opportunities? What are the risks? What does it mean when we think about technology as a significant component to the business? In essence, if a business were to ask itself, if our technology fails, what does that mean for the business, for our business strategy? If the answer is we have no business, or we have no business strategy that we can then execute on, every general manager needs to understand the basis for answering why that is. Why is it that we have no business, or why is it that we have no business strategy? And then understand and be able to relate the technical implications of that answer to what it means in terms of their engagement and understanding. As much as if, for instance, we were a major manufacturing facility, and the question is what happens if we lose those production lines? What are the implications for us, and how should we think about it and be ready in the event that something like that were to happen? So it's a little different. You can tell a variety of things around how different businesses think about technology, simply by starting and looking at the structure and where the technology organization reports. Or is there a technology organization that exists in that space, and what's its nature, and what does it look like? And again, I'll share more around that as we go through that. And then third, there isn't just what does it mean for a changing, shifting business environment, and how do we think about it as a general manager? It's also what does it mean in terms of understanding some of the technology elements? And that is, it helps create a better basis for thinking about technology and the larger implications of technology in a business context. Perhaps the simplest example of that anymore is in the cyberspace, and thinking about how that has changed the landscape of how folks have to think about technology, both on a personal basis, but also and around from a business perspective. And underneath that whole issue around the importance of cybersecurity is this concept of consumerization of information technology. And again, I will spend more time as we go through today's lecture and the next few weeks worth of lectures, touching on each of these three main elements. What is an IT strategy? What does it mean to be a business leader in today's world? And what are the implications of technology for us as a business leader? And then what are some of the macro trends in technology, and how should we think about those as individuals and as folks who are trying to manage our own respective careers whether it creates opportunities or threats, frankly, for us in a personal context or from a personal career perspective. I mentioned that we've got the required textbook, Managing and Using Information Systems, a Strategic Approach. Every week there are assigned readings out of that. I would like you to come having read that. I will be creating a discussion thread to give us the opportunity to speak more interactively, if you will. And what I'd like is before next week's lecture, for instance, for each of you to go out and think about what were the questions? What were the questions that arose as you listened today, and place those in the discussion thread. What I'd like to do is, whether it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes or a half an hour even, at each of these lectures is I will go through the discussion thread and look for some key messages and bring those through in terms of my perspective. Sometimes it's an easy answer and I can do it with a 1 or 2 sentence response in the thread. Sometimes it may require a little bit more thoughtful explanation, and so I will seek to bring that interaction from an asynchronous space via the discussion thread into this asynchronous space to hopefully explain further some of the concepts and some of the significance that I might find not so easy to respond to via the discussion thread. So not just what you may have heard each week, but also, having read the text, what you might like to hear or hear more about, or questions that I might relate from my background or my experience. Clearly, I'm what's referred to as a Section 16B officer at Humana, and there are elements of things that I may not be able to touch on directly because of my obligation to the company and regulatory expectations placed on me. But in the event that I can make it a general learning, I will certainly do that. And if I cannot, for various reasons, then I'll either not comment explicitly or share that it's an answer I can't provide. I do want you to participate in these discussions, and please do so. I want it to be a rich dialogue as best as we can, asynchronously, and I want you to glean what you can from this, not necessarily just from me lecturing on the contents of what's in the textbook. I've set it up also so that each of you will be responsible for answering case studies and responding to the questions. I'll be putting those online. You'll have, you can decide which ones you want to answer, provide thoughtful responses, and I'll grade those. And then, of course, there are a couple of exams. Those exams one will be about midway through the course, and the other is at the end. And I'll get to the balance of how that grades here in a second. Academic integrity is clearly very important, and not only is it something that I think each of us should aspire to as individuals, but as a Christian liberal arts university, the University of the Cumberlands values integrity as high, if not one of the highest standards of measuring an individual. So I strongly encourage you to maintain that level of integrity. Attendance, it's an asynchronous class. Ideally, you'll pick these up at your convenience, but the expectation is that you do participate, and the syllabus details out additional information around attendance, as well as handling issues if you're a student with a disability. So let me come back to the assignments section. I mentioned 2 exams. It'll be 50% of the score for the class. The discussion participation, this idea of engaging, whether it's in the getting to know you thread or these weekly, I have questions, I'd like to express my thoughts or ideas or ask you to touch on discussion. I will look at how you engage and the way in which you engage there. not just in terms of asking, but also participating. This is about participation. This is about sharing your personal experiences. Ideally, I'll get to know you. Ideally, you'll get to know others and they'll get to know you. And it will help them, whether it's a personal or professional, personal in terms of growth or professional in terms of applicability in the work environment. I know some of you are working. I've already seen that through some of the responses around get to know you. But the way we get better is by sharing thoughts and ideas. There are no right or wrong ways of doing that, and there are really no good or bad answers in doing that. There are perspectives, and perspectives matter, and that's a basis around diversity. And it isn't just diversity in terms of ethnicity or other, it's about diversity of experiences and sharing that. And then lastly, I mentioned the case studies. You will, I think there are 20 to 25 or so of them. You'll pick 3 and you'll complete those. And I have laid out time frames. The first case study will be due on week 4, and you'll see that in terms of the weekly topics. Grading will be, some of it will be very, very easy, multiple choice. Some of it will be a little bit more subjective. It might be short answer. And some of it may be very subjective in terms of expressing thoughts or ideas in response to concepts or questions. I will grade those appropriately. Again, in those cases, I will look at things like, what is the thoughtfulness of the response? Does it relate concepts that have either been discussed or that are included in the textbook? And that's how I look at those things that tend to be more subjective. I'm not going to go through the grade conversion element. You'll be able to see that on your own. And then again, weekly topics, lecture every week, review of the discussion questions and thoughts. That will take as long as I feel it needs to take based on a review of the online discussion forum. And then case studies and exams are laid out there. So I start out, and information technology strategy for some may seem like it's a very dry topic. It touches on virtually all aspects of information technology, and it's not easy to say that there's a clear way, a right way, or a wrong way. But there are better ways than others, and there are a few things to keep in mind as you think about information technology and a strategy around it. It's not unlike business strategy. I think you can look at, and we'll see examples here in a few minutes, you'll look at components of business strategy, but in essence, it's like trying to describe an individual's spirit or their personality by saying, well, the human body is made up of a skeleton and muscles and organs, and it's a collection of systems. But that doesn't really describe and characterize the personality or the spirit or soul of an individual. It's something that exists, and typically it exists in the context of this, what in essence is a living, breathing organism, which is the organization. It's the firm, it's the company, it's the thing that you refer to in its collective existence. And so you may not see something that's explicit when you look at a company and you try to understand whether it's a business strategy or an information technology strategy. In fact, in various startups that I've been involved in, the strategy evolves over time as experience is gained. If you want to think about it in terms of a child's personality begins to evolve over time. It isn't that you're able to see it from the very beginning. It's something that comes through the experiences that they have, and the genetics that embody them, which one could get to and describe as the culture of an organization. I'll touch on that as well. So the issue really is, you may be able to see it when you look at it, but it may not be clearly or well defined. It may be more implicit in terms of the behaviors. as opposed to explicitly written down on a piece of paper somewhere. And even if it's written down, the implicit strategy may actually not map to the explicit one, which is a whole set of other issues that arise. But there are two very important trends in the business environment today that have significant impacts on strategy and on information technology in particular. And I like to refer to them as the new currency. It's this idea that we are all, as consumers, being trained and taught that we are living in an experience-based economy. If you now look at how companies engage us, they engage us more as individuals. They engage us on the boundaries of how we experience them, and not specifically around their products or services anymore. If you want to think about, I'll give you an example that's relevant to me. I've trained on a particular type of plane. It's called Cirrus, and it's different than a Cessna, not just in terms of its appearance, but if you look at how the company Cirrus is engaging its customers, it doesn't talk about, let me describe the size of the power plant, the wingspan, the load that it can carry. Now, all of that information is accessible and available. What they do is they start with this idea that it's around the Cirrus life, the Cirrus lifestyle, and they seek to engage individuals around how they feel about something, and not necessarily around the thing, the product, or the service itself. And you see this with a number of companies today. You buy a product and you go through the unboxing, and as you unbox it, it's shrouded in the cellophane and it peels off, and it's well protected, and it's something that you experience as you're taking it out of the box. And so much of what happens is that we buy products and services for the purpose of what's referred to as the job to be done. Clay Christensen talks about this. We need to engage individuals, consumers, not around the product, but understanding what job they intend to do with the product. And then we have to create an experience that makes that job easy to do, which is, again, it gets back to that currency. And the only way that you get to the point where you understand the job that needs to be done is to really understand information around your consumers, which makes information one of those new currencies in this experience-based economy. An example of the job to be done. McDonald's was trying to figure out how to sell more products in the morning. And first thing they had to do was understand, well, what are the products that are really selling? Interestingly enough, they found that a high percentage of their morning sales was of milkshakes. Can you imagine that? If I had said to you, what do you think it is? You might have talked about Egg McMuffins, or you might have talked about their McCafe product. It's actually milkshakes. And going into the restaurant and watching people buy milkshakes is the first step. You now understand what they're doing, and not what they're doing, let me restate that. What they're buying, what they're buying. And then you've really got to get into their psyche to understand why they're buying milkshakes. And the only way you can do that is to engage them. And so what they then did next was they waited outside the restaurants and they asked folks, why are you buying milkshakes? And what they found, interestingly enough, is that most individuals had a fairly long commute in the morning. It was something like, on average, greater than 30 minutes. And they were looking for a product that they would have with them through that commute. And what they found was that the milkshake itself lasted for that 30 minutes. And then they said, that's the job to be done. It isn't as much as that it's filling. Of course, for most, it probably is. It isn't that it's just good tasting, and I'm sure for many it is. Otherwise, why would they buy it? Most of them were buying it because they wanted that thing in their hand, that companion, during a long morning commute. And they found, secondly, in the afternoon, when they saw milkshakes purchased in the afternoon, that generally was where a mother and her children after school would sit down and they would talk about what happened that day. And again, it was a companion that lasted for and through that job to be done, which in the case of the morning is make a long, lonely commute. And the afternoon is having the opportunity to sit down with the children and understand what their day at school was like. And so when they looked at what the job to be done was, they then said, we have to change what we do. And they actually moved the milkshake machine from more toward the back to the front. And the reason is they wanted to be able to service faster. In other words, if you were there and the job to be done is to get a travel companion, you want to get that quickly. And so they changed the technology and the way in which they were employing it in order to get the job done. But the key to all of this is they're starting from a perspective of understanding, deeply understanding the consumer. Not that they're buying more of something, but what are they focusing on as to the job to be done, and how do they then change what they do, leveraging technology, leveraging process change, leveraging people to bring that about. And underpinning this is the opportunity. If you understand the information and you understand this idea of ease of use, again, it's not exactly a direct analog, but think about bringing the milkshake machine to the front, making it visible, making it easy to get at. It's ease of use for employees. It's ease of use for the consumers. It's that pleasant and ease of use around an experience. Another example is Starbucks. Perhaps many of you have and do, where you will order your latte as you're walking down the street via the mobile app. You walk in and you pick it up. It's paid for through mobile. It's ordered through mobile. It's a simple experience if your job to be done is to get something that you enjoy and move on to your next thing. It's there, and it makes that whole experience a very pleasant one, a seamless one. So what does this mean in terms of being a general manager or an IT manager? Well, first of all, it gets toward this idea of, are you in the business of IT because it's so much in the business? It's becoming more and more inseparable for companies today to separate technology from what they do as a business. I mentioned, what would you do if you happen to lose a production facility? Well, what would happen if you lost technology? For a company like Cisco, which, by the way, is undergoing its own transformational experience, but for a company like Cisco, technology is it's the heart. It's the heart of what it does. But for a company like Lord & Taylor, is technology at the heart of what it does? I would argue that it is. And I would argue that it is because consumers, and this idea of consumerization of information technology, has brought that to the forefront in terms of how our behavior patterns have changed. If you went back 15 or 20 years, you would ask yourself, how do people purchase clothes? Well, they go to the store, they try them on, and they buy them. Today, I use Stitch Fix. I don't go to the store. In fact, I can't remember the last time I've gone to the store in order to purchase clothing. What do? I describe my interests, and I have a stylist. And frankly, that stylist is probably not unlike an Uber driver in that they are contracted with the company, and that their behaviors, what they do, is augmented with analytics provided by Stitch Fix. And they get to know me through analytics, and they present to me a set of choices every 6 or 8 weeks in terms of new clothing. And I try them on at home, and if I like the style, I keep it. If I don't, I bundle up, not everything, parts of things, or I'll send it back. And it's this idea of now would a Lord and Taylor ever imagine itself being in the world of technology? Now, I'm not trying to pick on Lords and Taylor. I'm just using that as an example of that, that this idea of what business are we really in has to shift for many companies. Walmart. Walmart is really grappling with the challenge that Amazon has created it, and it leads to a whole set of market dynamics that are much different than would have been the case 10 years ago for Walmart. And this whole world of how do I think about myself if I'm going to be successful in my career as a manager, a general manager in Walmart, or at Lords and Taylor, or in Cisco for that matter, or Oracle. All of these companies are feeling that challenge because of the shifting landscape that technology has created around not business models in terms of how to think differently about them, but business strategies and this whole issue around how competition and an insurgency of non-traditional competition has really changed the landscape. And then there's a question of anymore who's accountable and responsible for what. If you accept the idea that managers have to be more technology savvy, and therefore that begins to permeate the business strategy, which has to be enabled through the information technology strategy, they, as a collection, have to view themselves as responsible for information technology. And there's a difference between being accountable and being responsible. I'm a chief information officer at a large organization. I'm the senior leader in the company accountable for information technology. But my partners, my peers that are heads of the segments, operational leaders, are as responsible for information technology as I am. Why? Because in our case, technology permeates throughout the business. Not unlike they have to think about whether it's capital and how capital is deployed and optimized in the organization, but how physical assets are optimized and deployed in the organization, or provider relationships, or focusing on our members and delivering a simplified experience for members. So general managers who live in organizations where technology is a key underpinning of the success of the business strategy have to think about themselves not as technologists, but as technology savvy. And that is a way to deliver on that responsibility. Now, Equifax. If you look at how Equifax handled the circumstance that they found themselves in, and think about technology and business strategy, I would venture you would come to the conclusion that Equifax viewed itself more in the position of delivering to its customers, where its customers were institutional in nature, banks or large banks, those who would consume credit information that they made available. But in fact, the real customer, very, very likely, were the consumers that were making this information available, because there was a bit of a quid pro quo. I'm in search of a credit rating because I'm in search of obtaining credit. So I'm going to share a variety of personal information with you. And as it turns out, I hold that very near and dear to me. And I'm trusting that you will treat it that way because, in my view, I'm a customer of yours. I'm consuming your services. But if you listen to how they responded in the early days and weeks of the crisis, they responded with respect to what appeared to be a CEO intent of addressing their customers in the institutional space. And if they really understood technology and how vital technology was to them in the consumerization of IT world, would they have practiced a different standard of care? Would they have thought differently in terms of how they would respond? I read one comment that they were one major breach or significant breach away from bankruptcy. And why is that? It's not that their customers' information was breached. It would be consumers' information that's breached. And without that, what is their business proposition? What business model do they have? What business strategy are they left with? And understanding technology in those things really, really critical. So what are the implications for us today? Competition, I already touched on this. It isn't just keep your eyes on traditional, it's non-traditional. And one of the first things that you do when you think about developing an information technology strategy is you have to scan two things. You have to scan the technology landscape. What are the macro trends in technology so that you can relate them back to what opportunities or threats they may create for you? But you also have to look at a competitive scan, and that should include non-traditional competitors. And in the health space, as an example, some non-traditional competitors are Google, Apple, Amazon. And so it's not how do you think about whether it's HCA or Tenant or Aetna or others. It's this idea that if we are in the world of delivering care or providing insurance, critical to that will be the analytics that we use in order to understand our consumers. Again, as a big part of understanding that job to be done, but also technology and how do you engage and interact with those customers. And if you think about it and you ask yourself, well, what is Google, for instance, really do as a company? One may say, well, it's an internet search engine that gets paid through ads. Actually, I think if you talk to them, they would say, we're an analytics company, and we use technology to advance our analytics agenda. So traditional and non-traditional technologies must understand, general managers and technologists alike understand mobile, social, cloud, and analytics. And you've heard me reference analytics many times. Analytics is the basis for delivering on the ease of use and the information both as new currencies. Mobile, where it starts, is the thing that actually today creates that ease of use. If you think about the degree to which we are technology-wise, mobilely enabled any longer, so any more mobile as a way of interacting and engaging, and that ease of use and delivering on that currency is critical and vital. And why do we engage mobile? The vast majority of time, it's because of social. And we're interacting with someone, whether it's through Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram or WhatsApp. That's how we engage. It could be with a company, it could be with friends, it could be with family, it could be with my physician. But social interactions is the primary driver that we engage with technology anymore. And obviously, those capabilities are delivered via the cloud. No longer are we restricted to a box, whether it's a laptop or a desktop computer, for what we are attempting to do. It's actually a highly connected, interoperable world. Some industries are better at it than others, but it's going to progress over time, which is why technology is so important to understand for a general manager, the implications on business strategy. And then analytics, understanding those interactions and how to better engage your consumer, your customer, via social and mobile mechanisms, because we any longer live in this world of consumerization of information technology. And the ease of use and information as the new currencies in that experience-based economy is so vital, I can't overemphasize it enough. Now, of course, at the end of the day, there are always these, what I call the never-ending oldies but goodies of grow, whether it's new or existing revenues or markets. It's optimize, whether it's resources or costs inside an organization, or pleasing, whether it's your customers or your employees. I believe that you cannot deliver a, a good experience, one that's ease of use full to your customers, unless you're doing the same for your own employees. So when you get into prioritization and when you talk about strategy, technology strategy, you must think not just about plant and equipment, but you must also think about the individuals, whether they're consumers, suppliers, or employees, and how do you engage them in an ease of use manner. And there is, and I've alluded to this before, this new never-ending oldie of securing, and that's information as well as your systems. And there are bad people out there, and they are extremely well enabled. One anymore can purchase a rootkit very cheaply in order to launch very sophisticated attacks against companies' virtual presence on the web in a way that is almost unimaginable. And we, as consumers, are making that much easier. So on a personal basis, I would encourage each of you that employ technology to make sure that you secure that, which means use complex passwords, use multi-factor authentication when it's made available to you. If you're going to be doing finances via a machine at home, segregate, dedicate, whether it's a laptop or a desktop, and the only thing you do on that is your finances, and use another machine for browsing, shopping, or any other kinds of things, but maintain a physical separation. And if you put a device on your network, whether it's an internet protocol, an IP camera, or other, one of the first things you should do after you install it is change the password, use a complex password, and I would encourage you to also use a password manager that uses 256-bit encryption, like, for instance, LastPass or RoboForm. And again, if you want, ask me a question and I'll share more via the discussion thread. Now, I've touched on this. This is in the textbook, but I don't believe the authors drew out the most important aspect of this. They spoke about perspectives, and that's correct, and they do matter. But we tend to be biased in our perspective, especially in my experiences in varying industries and companies. If you go to the left, you'll see you have a management team and you have various functions in the organization, and that's one way to look at it. And typically, that's how you're describing the structure of an organization. But remember, an organizational structure is one element of organizing, which is why this topic of organizational strategy is just as important. If you look to the right, you'll see that they spoke about processes. And this is where I think a key learning around technology strategy is vital, especially when you think about the experience-based economy and this ease of use. The management of a company experiences the organization through its structure. The consumer experiences the organization through its process structure. No matter what you are, you'll hear conversation about formal and informal reporting structures. Well, on the process side, you either have implicit processes or explicit processes. And this gets into this concept of a capability maturity model for companies. Most companies exist in a level 1 place, which is what's called worship the hero. Most companies have leaders who, on their own, operate and drive much of what happens, not just in the structure of the organization, but a consequence of the implicit structure of the process, which, depending on the individual, can have significant impacts on the customer, the consumer, and their experience. And that means that in those companies that are more level 1, the success of the company is driven more by the individual and their insight around the experience than it is around the maturity of the organization to do that on its own. And perhaps one of the greatest examples of that is Apple, and how Steve Jobs really defined the experience of the customer and really drove a lot of the process that goes on inside the organization. And yes, information flow is vital and critical, and it flows across functions in the organization, it flows up and down the management team, and it flows across processes and through processes and to the customer. And so, yes, information is important to understand and know, but having carefully thought through and having a culture that's driven by people that understand the value of that and have the skills to understand that is very, very critical. And I'll talk more about that when we get into the organizational strategy piece. So again, it's important to understand both of these are critical. Typically, the management structure is well understood because it's driven by a lot of internal things like compensation, performance appraisals, escalations of how you take an issue and you move it up the chain of command, so to speak. Processes is more function of the maturity of the organization, which can be very immature over great periods of time because of the nature of the leadership. And what you have to do is you have to move toward where the processes are defined and followed and institutionalized, and you have clear measures, and they at least exist explicitly. And then the next stage is to take the organization to a level 3 organization where you have organizational capabilities that will look back at the defined processes and improve those. And many companies today are finding themselves in this place of they've existed in level 1 and partially in 2, and they're rapidly trying to create level 3 organizational capabilities to improve 2, but 2 doesn't exist fully at the same time because there's still this dependency on 1. And much of that is driven by new entrants into their marketplace where they don't have the burden of years of existing implied process structure that gets in their way of their ability to deliver and ease of use. And technology will tend to follow organizational structures, whether they're process oriented or structurally, organizationally structure oriented. And the inflexibility of those to move with agility is challenging. And this is why you see companies undergoing a pretty substantial press and challenge. A great example is Oracle. Oracle, most of you may think of it as a database company, but in fact, Oracle delivers a variety of enterprise solutions, general ledger based, talent management based, and much of their capability has come either through organically developing it or in large part when you look at their customer relationship management technology, whether it's through PeopleSoft acquisition or other. But what they've done is they've absorbed those processes from other companies. And then you say to yourself, you look at like a Workday, and Workday actually started up from PeopleSoft executives who said, you know what? The hockey puck isn't here. The hockey puck is over there. And they built a set of processes based in technology, which happens to be cloud-based. It's not the cloud base that enabled it. It's how they philosophically design the organization and leverage the technology strategy, cloud-based, to deliver on a business strategy, which was changing to, we're going to do it on a subscription basis. It's the key to that success is more rooted in how they developed the organization's processes from the ground up with an enabling technology, with a new business model, which is subscription-based, for a strategy to dominate in the enterprise resource planning space, whether it's general ledger or talent management. And they have become a force to be reckoned with. And Oracle found itself challenged by understanding their customer. Their customer were institutional customers, not unlike the Equifax story, but the customer is the ease of use. They were used to selling into whether it was a CFO or a CHRO, Chief Head Human Resources Officer. And yet the experience was to the recruit or to the employee. And the experience reflected a process structure that was not as ease of use centric as you would see with a Workday. And so a lot of what Oracle has been doing is striving toward cloud-based approaches with business model changes, but the biggest challenge they have is how do they think about the talent and the processes that they have in place to deliver on the strategy, if you will, that a Workday has pursued. So how do we think about information? Well, first of all, you have to think about it in terms of operational levels of the organization, managerial levels, and then executive. So this whole ecosystem of information is driven by who consumes it and what their perspective is. Clearly, at an operational level, there are implications around the level of detail, the focus on a sub-process and an overarching process, or a department within an overarching organization within the larger organization. As you get to the executive level, the perspective widens out to more across the enterprise and frankly out into markets. The information ecosystem is really this idea that anymore technology isn't just thinking about data, and it isn't just thinking about information, which is where you bring data together to where it has a meaningful use, to knowledge where you're bringing broader insights and experience base into that. And I like the textbook reflects on wisdom. And what you'll see is, as I talk about it, technology actually exists to support all levels of the information ecosystem. And as I just alluded to, the characteristics of information are very relevant. How old is it? How detailed is it? And where does it come from? All of these are important considerations when you think not just about the management ecosystem, but also the information ecosystem, the data, the information, and the knowledge. What level are you supporting? Because knowledge is as important at the operational level as it is at the managerial or the executive level. The level of detail that's necessary to support knowledge may be different. Where it comes from, whether it's internal or external or largely external, and perhaps even how old it is. Although anymore, I shouldn't say most, a large number of organizations are consuming massive amounts of information that is highly detailed and is highly current, and will speak to you in the moment and inform you of actions that need to be taken that might have taken days to weeks and perhaps months previously without a highly connected mobile world. Now, I mentioned the decisioning in an information ecosystem. Well, it really goes from predictable to more prescriptive to where it's more wisdom oriented. So if you want to think about the technology stack for that, on the predictable side, it starts with this idea of production rules. It's simple if, then, else's. And it's quick and easy to codify those choices and implement those. Insights driven, or where you get to where things are more prescriptive or rely on contextualized information, employ more advanced analytic models, whether it's advanced Bayesian models or others that may be rooted in topological analysis, as a for instance. These techniques tend to help bring you into this space of gaining the insight. Now, some cases, the analytics require the scientist, the data scientist, to have the insight to begin with, and in which case the advanced analytics are used more to forward thinking about hypotheses and prove them out. The hypothesis originates with the data scientist, who then uses the analytics to prove it one way or another, which then provides the insight, which ideally is brought back and into and made something actionable inside the organization leveraging technology. On the other end, there are tools that help the data science become more productive. The example I gave is topological analysis, and IOSD is a company that does this, where you can take the information and you can put it in, and it will use mapping to and network to visually see information that seems to be high predictors of things. Well, it's almost like spotlighting something for the data scientists to become more productive, to form more insightful hypotheses, to then use those to determine what truly is happening. And then lastly is artificial intelligence. And this is, if you look at the former example around the data analytics having to hypothesize, typically that is, you take inputs and you hypothesize and develop programs, and then you look at outputs to see how successful you are. Artificial intelligence, what you do is you take the inputs and outputs and you allow these advanced models, whether it's neural networks or other, to develop the program for you. And then at some point, they begin to augment human behavior. So greater human wisdom with artificial intelligence can lead to overall greater wisdom without humans. And we'll talk more about this in the coming weeks. Now, I've already alluded to this. I'm not going to go into much more detail, but this is the important thing to think about when we think about information technology strategy. It does not exist on its own. It should exist to support the business strategy. Just like you see here, the pyramid supports the base of the business strategy, and the org strategy should also exist to support the business strategy. And it should be connected to and help enable the IT strategy, and likewise the IT strategy should be connected to and help enable the org strategy. And if these are done, if the business strategy is connected to the IT strategy, and the business strategy is connected to the org strategy, and the org strategy is connected to the IT strategy, you have alignment. And does a good business plan evolve or come from doing that? The short answer is no. A good business plan comes from the management team's alignment. And this is by making those either through a worship the hero action, where it becomes aligned because the individual maintains the alignment, or because the actions of making each of these explicit and then reviewed collectively is what drives the alignment. And so is it for forming a common vision? Well, sort of, but at the end of the day, it's more to form the guardrails for the tactics that ensue. That's what alignment is about. If the management team is aligned on these elements, and you have a good business strategy and plan, then it's really about execution. And except for one important point we're going to touch on, culture. And so in the right hands, the right business plan can be incredibly successful with alignment. But in the wrong hands, the right strategy, even with alignment, can be unsuccessful. So before I get into some of the details, I just wanted to touch on, well, mission is really what's your purpose? Why are you here? And it should be something that is more inspirational than dry. It should really be a clear and compelling statement that unifies an organization's effort, and it describes what the firm is really about. And so you will hear broad-based comments from companies, and I won't go into them. There are some good examples in the book, but it's really about what the organization as a living, breathing entity seeks to do. Just like each and every one of you ideally has some aspiration that drives you. Could be a personal one, it could be a professional, but there may be elements of both. But the organization needs that purpose, that reason for being. The strategy is nothing other than a set of things pulled together, actions that fulfill the objectives, purposes, and goals that are the underpinnings of the mission. The business model is just how the company will go about and make money, and how customers will gain value from its product and service offering. And a business strategy is a way of articulating where a business seeks to go and how it expects to get there. And obviously, you can look at a company and you can determine what type of approach it is taking. And ideally, it's differentiated itself in terms of this, how to think about strategic advantage. And it starts with, am I focusing on a particular part of an industry, or am I looking at the entire industry? And then, does my customer look at me as a unique offering or strictly as a low-cost option? And where companies will get themselves into challenges, and this goes toward the alignment question I brought up earlier. If a management team isn't aligned on whether we're taking a differentiation strategy or a cost leadership strategy or a focus strategy, you will be challenged, because it's that trying to do everything for everyone and not getting something done well for anyone. If you're not focused and you don't have alignment, then you will find yourself challenged to compete successfully. Now, that was a good way to think about a strategy. Today's world, in some cases, you cannot be a traditional thinker, if you will, around strategy. That's more looking back and describing. This is more thinking about and acting. Well, first of all, there's hyper competition that exists today, where in certain marketplaces, the speed of change is unbelievable. I'll give you an example. Uber came onto the scene and fundamentally changed the paid transportation space, whether it's limo services or taxi services. Caught unawares, they came in, they came up with, in essence, a crowdsourced approach to staffing and enabling that economy. And it changed fundamentally. And what did they do next? They started in on self-driving cars. So why did they do that? Because that is the next boundary that they're going to face in terms of a challenge to them, because their model, remember I used the word crowdsourced, is based on crowdsourcing. Next place it's going to go, if the technology gets there, and it will, in part, perhaps even large part, or perhaps even wholly, into the autonomous vehicle space. And then where is their model? Where are they going to go in terms of how they enable that as a strategy? And so that brings up this whole idea of self-disruption. And they see the marketplace changing because of hyper competition, and they took an approach that was really around self-disruption. And the dynamic capabilities of a firm will describe how well it can compete in that space. I gave you examples of the institutionalization of certain processes that can get in the way of creating the ease of use, especially if it's more process that's implicitly defined as opposed to explicitly defined. Those are organizations where they have a tremendous difficulty around handling the dynamics of hyper competition. And in most cases, most organizations should look toward the changes in their marketplace and in competition to see how dynamic it is, and they need to begin to shift their focus around creating those dynamic capabilities and even adopting self-disruption as a way of creating as opposed to losing. And to me, red ocean just means it's a fierce world out there, and it is tough, and it is taken, one foot at a time, as opposed to seeing a blue ocean, which is a green field, and how do you go in and take advantage of that blue ocean? And perhaps an example of that is Airbnb envisioned an opportunity and created an industry where none did. Again, crowdsourced still in the hospitality space, but clearly successful in changing the way hotels and bed and breakfasts think. I've touched on this previously. Business strategy has to flow in execution through the organizational strategy. And culture is a huge part of that. And the organization's effectiveness in delivering on its business strategy will be determined almost exclusively around culture. The other elements can be addressed, but culture will determine whether that organizational effectiveness that you see on the right as an exploding icon is going to be red, in which case the best laid plans go awry, or green, in which case the best laid plans supported by culture lead to unbelievable success. And so it doesn't matter how good your business strategy is. It doesn't matter how good your technology strategy is. If you do not have a good organizational strategy that's steeped in understanding as its foundation culture, you will never be successful. You can take a company and you can give it the technology and you can give it the business plan, but without the right culture, it cannot be replicated and the company will not be successful. So, to bring today's lecture to close, here's what I would encourage you to think about with information technology. It isn't about hardware, it isn't about software, it's not about networking, and it's not about data. Those are all important concepts to understand. An information technology strategy is, and I apologize, it's a set of technical capabilities that support specific business capabilities that are necessary to be differentiating in the marketplace. It reflects the related investments that are necessary, where clearly defined outcomes have been identified. And there's a governance framework that considers organizational strategy implications like culture, change management within it, that is used to oversee the implementation of the IT strategy and to manage the change that the organization will undergo because of it. And oftentimes, companies that do not go back to the capability maturity model, where they're a level 1 organization, when you start out and seek to be explicit about developing your IT strategy, what you will find is that it actually bleeds into and serves as a forcing function around the business strategy as well as the organizational strategy. So, in closing, I think I've gone over a little bit, and I apologize for that. I thank you for hanging in there with me. Hopefully you found this enlightening, and as I like to say to folks in my world, hope is not a strategy. So to the degree that you haven't found it as enlightening as you could have, either because I haven't been clear or I've communicated in a way that I could communicate differently, or you just have questions, or maybe you heard some things and you think that there are some more important things that should be brought through in a conversation about IT strategy, please engage, post your questions, your observations, your feedback. If you're uncomfortable doing that and you want to do it directly to me, my email is on the syllabus. It's brian.leclerc@ucumberlands.edu. Send me a note. I am here for the purposes of helping you gain insight into and practical application around information technology strategy. And if I'm not doing that, and that's the job to be done, let me know, and I will do my best to make it better. And with that, thank you and have a great week.